there are some great questions that have intrigued and haunted us since the dawn of humanity. What is out there? How did we get here? What is the world made of? The story of our search to answer these questions is the story of science. Of all human endeavors, science has had the greatest impact on our lives, on how we see the world, on how we see ourselves. Its ideas, its achievements, its results are all around us. But the story of science has been shaped as much by what's outside the laboratory as inside. Power and passion, rivalry and sheer chance have all played significant roles. This is the story of how history made science and how science made history. This time, an ancient human ambition. The search for limitless power. We are the most power-hungry generation that has ever lived. Energy is the heartbeat of our civilization. The quest to discover what power can do and what power actually is forms the foundation of the modern world. Together, these simple aims have led to some of the greatest insights in the history of science. The 17th century was a pivotal age, when the balance between man and nature began to change forever. There was, of course, no electricity. There were no cars, no trains. The most common power sources had to be fed and watered. Horsepower meant just that. But a remote beach in Holland was the setting for a glimpse of what was to come. Years ago, you might have been surprised to see a much larger version of one of these fly past.
It was 8 meters long and 4 meters wide. It had wheels with a diameter of 2 meters.
It was the ancestor of the modern land yachts Floor Lagerway sails today. It was called the Wind Chariot. Designed to carry heavily armed soldiers along the coastline. It amazed and terrified in equal measure. Here was the power of the wind being harnessed to produce motion on land.
This yacht was the fastest thing ever made by man, and to give you an impression,
It could outpace a running horse.
The Wind Chariot was designed by an engineer and mathematician called Simon Steven, a man who would literally change the face of Holland and help turn it into a great trading empire.
Simon Steven developed something that was really unique 409 years ago. It's amazing.
But Steven's ambitions for wind power went far beyond just chariots. He wanted to change his country by harnessing the power of the wind as no one had before. And his tool was to be mathematics. Mathematics was changing. For hundreds of years in the universities, geometry and arithmetic had been important theoretical pursuits. Practical applications, like building bridges and firing cannons, were limited. But now men like Simon Stevin would use mass theory to create something much bigger, a new mathematically grounded science. And that would help them solve a whole range of complex problems. The problem Stevin turned his mathematics to was a crucial one in low-lying Holland. How to keep the country dry. Professor Gerard van Bussel has studied his work.
Simon Stevin did not only perform mathematics, so to say, but he wanted to see how he could use that to improve machines.
For over a century, Holland's windmills had been scooping water from drainage ditches, tipping it into the canals to carry it away. Stevin was convinced that mathematics could make windmills much more efficient. But it was a complex undertaking.
The difficulty is, this is not a perpendicular gearing, but this wheel is slightly tilted, something like 13 degrees and so on. And that makes the movements of these teeth inside these staves very complex. It's not only rotating, but also moving up and downwards and moving inwards and outwards.
Stevin would have to account for every one of those angles and movements. From the sails to the shaft, to the cogs. It was a mathematical minefield. To improve the efficiency of the windmill, his calculations would require a completely new approach.
It's really kind of three-dimensional mathematics that you need to be able to do, and before Stevin no one could do that.
Stevin designed new cogs, paddle wheel shapes and sluices, even a chain of windmills that could be used to drain not just fields, but a lake. His modifications were so effective, this new mathematically designed windmill was 3 times more efficient than the ones it replaced. What's more, Stevin patented his many inventions to ensure that his work would be well rewarded. Mathematics made Stevin rich, and it wasn't long before it started to change the whole country. Holland would use the new windmills to help turn itself into an industrial powerhouse. Seeds and nuts were ground to extract their valuable oil. Paper mills became mechanized. Wood could be cut 30 times faster and with greater precision than by hand, helping to turn this small country into the biggest shipbuilders in Western Europe. To the sound of mathematically designed mills whirring in the wind, Holland became a dynamic trading nation. And Amsterdam, one of the richest and most cosmopolitan cities on earth. The economic growth of Holland changed the power map of Europe. It had been helped by advances in windmill design, a new mathematically based science, and a belief amongst men like Simon Stevin that science should be useful. It was obvious what power could do. What was still missing was any scientific understanding of what power actually is. That would only begin to emerge far later, on the other side of the English Channel. The English country house of the 18th century was a place of intrigue, romance, and gossip, but was also host to the occasional visiting experimenter. An unlikely combination that would mark the birth of a world-changing new source of power. Science had become popular entertainment for the drawing room. Contraptions developed as real scientific experiments dazzled and amazed. Those looking on were stunned by phenomena like static charge, and silenced by the baffling qualities of the vacuum. An alarm was placed in a vacuum jar and set to go off. The air was pumped out, and when the alarm rang, nothing could be heard. No one really had a satisfactory scientific explanation for these things. But the spectacle helped bring new ideas to a new attentive audience, and to one ambitious entrepreneur in particular. Matthew Boulton was a manufacturer who belonged to a group called the Lunar Society, so called because they met on the night of the full moon. The Lunar Society brought together industrialists, experimenters, and natural philosophers, who all shared a love of practical knowledge. Through the Lunar Society, Matthew Boulton met the Scottish inventor and engineer, James Watt. For some years, Watt had been working with prototype steam engines. This prompted Boulton to invite him to take part in a joint business venture. Together, they would form one of the most powerful relationships of the 18th century. And the steam engine they produced would transform not just technology, but science itself. This is an original Boulton and Watt steam engine, with all the expected elements: a man, some coal, and a furnace. What might be less expected is that it is stationary and it is vast. So vast that this engine, originally built to keep the nearby canal topped up with water, occupies the entire building and boasts its very own driver. Today, Harry Willis is at the controls.
We call this the driving platform. These are the levers that control the valves that control the passage of steam through the engine. This is the steam throttle. Basically, you turn it that way to reduce the steam, and you turn it that way to increase the steam.
But the driving force of Boulton and Watt's engine is not the power of steam directly. Rather an industrial version of that country house trick, the vacuum. The steam is injected into the cylinder, then quickly cooled, creating a vacuum. This drags the piston head down, providing the engine with its lifting power. It's a process this machine is still able to perform after nearly 200 years.
This engine began to work here in 1812. Put that in context, it's the year that Napoleon retreated from Moscow. And you're seeing it today actually doing the job that it was installed to do. The modern pumps that normally maintain the canal are switched off and are actually now maintaining the canal. Just bear with me. Just let me get this going again. As you see, you can't keep your eye off it.
James Watt didn't invent the steam engine, or even the idea of using a vacuum to pump water. Engines had been powered in this way for decades. Watt's fame, and that of his machine, rests on one small modification, located here, right at the bottom of the engine.
James Watt's key invention was that of the separate condenser. He did the condensing action of the steam in a tank of cold water down here, separate from the main cylinder.
By cooling the steam in a separate condenser, the all-important vacuum could be created well away from the hot cylinders. A small but ingenious technical innovation with enormous benefits.
The more efficient the engine, the less coal you use for every 100 gallons of water that you pump. Previous engines would have used 4 times the amount of coal.
Being 4 times more efficient, the potential savings from using a Boulton and Watt engine were enormous. Something any businessman could understand. The success of Boulton and Watt's engine was not just due to new technology, but also a clever piece of financial engineering.
They had a patent on their engines. They charged a royalty on the amount of coal saved by each of their engines, and it is also said that they charged a royalty on every stroke that the engine made.
By having a patent, Boulton and Watt made money not just by selling their engines, but by charging the owners a royalty to use them. In our search for power, the smell of money is rarely far away. But for all the riches on offer, there was little scientific theory behind the Boulton and Watt engine. There was still no real explanation of what energy actually was. The science would have to wait until steam power became a force throughout the land.
Beijing 电视台纪实高清频道，用心记录世界。
In an attempt to avoid Boulton and Watt's patent, some Cornish engineers began to build their own steam engine.
Trevithick could see that high pressure would be more efficient, save coal, save money. Good idea.
Victorian society was obsessed with efficiency. Waste was not just uneconomical, it was also unchristian.
That attitude towards life was also related to their attitude towards machines. If the machine was efficient and economic, it wasn't being wasteful. You were using it to its best possible advantage.
Thermodynamics was one of the crowning achievements of 19th century science. Inspired in part by the desire to explain the technological wonder of the age, the steam engine.
There was a time when people thought Ireland's west coast was the edge of the world. A vast ocean meets this lonely shore, and mighty cliffs rise up to mark the boundary between land and sea. For millennia, people have stood here in awe of what lies beyond.
Now we're following in the footsteps of those who've battled to survive and to thrive on this wild Atlantic shore. A voyage of discovery along Ireland's northwest coast.
And the team's along for the ride. Alice is searching for Ireland's first farmers.
Yes, I got a stone. That is remarkable.
Dick discovers how Mr. Marconi sparked a radio revolution to transmit messages across the Atlantic.
Hey, we got sparks.
Miranda tracks down Irish mountain hares lying low on the coast.
With more heads than you could shake a stick at.
Barefoot Nick explores a magical island community.
That's the smallest school I've ever seen in my life.
And I'm all at sea.
Am I going in, yeah?
Relying on the lifeboat crews and air crews of the Atlantic Rescue Services to keep me dry and high.
This is coast and beyond.
《北京电视台纪实高清频道》，用心记录世界。
The big demand for steam engines was in the West Country, pumping floodwater from mines. And the mine owners soon became dependent on Boulton and Watt's more efficient machines. Many quickly became fed up with having to pay annual royalties. In an attempt to avoid Boulton and Watt's patent, some Cornish engineers began to build their own steam engines. One notable steam maverick was Richard Trevithick. He would take steam power in an entirely new direction. With this, the Puffing Devil, all 8 horsepower of it. Unlike Boulton and Watt's engine, it moved. Trevithick's genius was that he built high-pressure steam engines, where the steam drives the pistons.
Trevithick could see that high pressure would be more efficient, save coal, save money. Good idea.
He didn't need vacuums or condensers, and instead of being the size of houses, his steam engines were small, powerful, mobile. And as an added bonus, Trevithick's engine was one of the first to produce the familiar sound of high-pressure steam escaping. This new steam engine clearly pointed to a better way of moving goods and people around. Yet Trevithick has not gone down in history as the father of the modern railway.
He was working at an ironworks, and there was a horse-drawn tramway which took the steel down to a local canal, and he said, you can put a steam engine on here, far better. And so he built a steam engine, and he demonstrated it would pull 10 tons.
But there was a problem, and it wasn't with the Puffing Devil.
The rails were cast iron, short lengths of cast iron, and with a weight on them, they just cracked under the strain. And so, rather ironically, the tramroad went back to horse haulage again.
The history of science is full of moments like this. Great ideas need to happen in the right place at the right time.
Trevithick wasn't a very good businessman, so he wasn't a self-publicist. Had he found someone that would have linked up with him, I think it would have made a huge difference.
Unfortunately, Trevithick never found his own Matthew Boulton, someone to invest in his ideas and make money. Richard Trevithick was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Steam engines would have an enormous global impact. They were born out of a combination of different forces. The Lunar Society, where men of science could meet and exchange ideas. Technical innovations, like high-pressure steam. the promise of money and protection of patents. From all this emerged a previously unimaginable source of power. The mechanical equivalent of countless horses to work the factories and mills of the 19th century landscape. The steam engines, their profits, their owners, gave political power to a new group of people, the middle classes. These were the forces now shaping Victorian Britain. The quest for power had produced much, but still with no more scientific understanding than had existed a century before. Only now, belatedly, came the theorists, drawing on a surprising source of inspiration. Victorian society was obsessed with efficiency. Waste was not just uneconomical, it was also unchristian. Nowhere was this more true than in the kitchen. At the end of a meal, food wasn't thrown away. It was recycled. Publications like Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management contained numerous recipes for using valuable leftovers. Old bones to make soup, old bread to make a pudding. But it wasn't only at home that the Victorians were efficient. Science sought efficiency too.
That attitude towards life was also related to their attitude towards machines. If the machine was efficient and economic, it wasn't being wasteful. You were using it to its best possible advantage.
As the steam engine took off, it became important to compare which engines were more efficient. A new theory of energy would help make precisely that sort of judgment. Because in the early 19th century, no one really knew what energy actually was. What was becoming increasingly clear was that energy in different forms was interchangeable. It could be transferred.
This interchangeability of energy was very, very fundamental to the science of the second half of the 19th century.
For the first time, such diverse things as burning coals, boiling water, and the production of steam could be united by a single concept, that of energy. The chemical energy of the coal is turned into heat as it burns. This energy heats the kettle and the water inside, which then turns into steam. Steam which can then be used to perform work. This was a turning point in science.
All the research into steam engines culminated in two of the most important laws of physics, and they're called the two laws of thermodynamics.
The first law of thermodynamics is a mathematical description of energy, known as conservation of energy. It simply states that energy cannot be created or destroyed. So you can never get more energy out than is contained in the fuel you put in. The second law states that no machine can ever be 100% efficient. Together they apply to every source of power, from kettles to steam engines to windmills. Everything. Thermodynamics was one of the crowning achievements of 19th century science. Inspired in part by the desire to explain the technological wonder of the age, the steam engine, and by an obsession with thrift and efficiency. But thermodynamics was only one part of what was to be a much more comprehensive theory of energy and power. In June 1772, a small sailing expedition set off for the coast of France on a voyage that would help point science towards the modern age. Its leader was John Walsh, recently retired from the British East India Company. Walsh was fascinated by the electricity found in nature. He went looking for it not in the skies, but underwater, in a fish. The torpedo fish. It could create electric shocks at will and use them to catch its prey. Walsh wanted to find out whether the power emitted by this strange fish was the same as that given off by lightning, or a spark generator. Some of the fish John Walsh brought back are still preserved at the Hunterian Museum in London. They were dissected by the renowned surgeon John Hunter to reveal some highly peculiar organs.
What we have here is a section through the body of a torpedo. Here's the top, here's the bottom, this is the front of the fish, and a slice has been cut through the body. I think it was fairly obvious to him what was unusual about the torpedo, these two very distinctive organs, one on each side of the body, that must be connected with its ability to deliver these shocks. This slice is taken down the length of the body, through one of the pectoral fins, and it shows in detail the structure of those electric organs. But also Hunter's worked a bit of magic on it by injecting it with a red dye to show where the blood vessels are.
The electrical charge seemed to come from these tiny cells, now known as electrocytes.
The way in which the torpedo generates the charge is through having a series of electrocytes stacked up within the electric organs, and together these allow the fish to generate an electric shock.
John Walsh was convinced that the electricity from the torpedo fish was not only the same as the electricity in lightning, but that it must also be possible to generate it using a machine. But plenty of people didn't agree with Walsh. It seemed almost sacrilegious to claim that electricity from a machine made by man was the same as electricity from a fish which had been created by God. And yet proof that this was indeed the case was just around the corner. In the archives of the Royal Society in London sits a letter that dates back to 1800. Written by the Italian scientist Alessandro Volta, it essentially contains instructions on how to build your own torpedo fish.
This is a letter, a facsimile of the letter from Volta to the Royal Society, containing all the instructions together with a handy diagram. And everything I need is in this box. Some plates of zinc, plates of copper, and some pads impregnated with liquid. Volta said you could carry on building these piles as high as you liked until they became unstable. And I think we'll finish ours there. It does look a bit like the electric organ in the torpedo. And it's certain that's what Volta had in mind when he referred to this as an artificial electric organ.
The voltaic pile as it became known, could generate a significant electric current. Volta couldn't measure it, but he could demonstrate that it delivered a shock just like the torpedo fish.
To an audience in the 18th century, the idea that this could produce a current must have come as quite a surprise. In building his pile, Volta had created something really exceptional, a device that could produce a constant current of electricity rather than just a single discharge. He had, in fact, invented what we now know as the battery.
But for a long time, people had no idea what to do with a battery. There was no obvious practical application. There was nothing to plug it into. It would be a generation before somebody managed to find a significant practical use. Outside the world of science, the political map of the world was changing. European empires searched out new lands to control. Ships full of raw materials and manufactured goods plied the oceans. If information could be moved around this increasingly connected world, and moved fast, it would be of great benefit to empire builders and traders alike. Volta's pile was about to get plugged into something useful. And this time, it was science that led the way. Thanks to a man called Hans Christian Ørsted.
The story is that Hans Ørsted was just happened to be playing around with his apparatus, thinking of something exciting to show his students. He had a compass, an electric pile, and he had an electric wire.
When Ørsted connected everything together, something unexpected happened.
When he put the current on, the needle twitched. When he took it off, the needle twitched again.
Somehow, the electrical current in the wire was acting like a magnet and making the needle move.
It doesn't seem like a very significant set of apparatus, but within a few years after Ørsted made that initial discovery, the world was literally transformed.
That small twitching compass needle rapidly grew into the electric telegraph. The power of electricity could now be used to send and receive messages almost instantaneously. Telegraph cables were soon running right across the globe. Alongside the era's other great invention, steam, the combination was unstoppable. Steam power did the heavy work, draining mines, spinning cotton, and powering a new railway network. And with the telegraph, the battery brought control, both political and financial. Together, they helped build the empires of 19th century Europe. But the telegraph also marked the start of a new ambition in science.
When Ørsted linked together electricity and magnetism, that was the first step in moving towards a grand union of all the forces of nature.
Electromagnetism was one of the greatest achievements of the 19th century. It would go on to explain the very nature of light, of radio waves, even X-rays, helping persuade 19th century physics that it had discovered all the fundamental laws of nature. As it turned out, this cozy assumption was somewhat wide of the mark.
北京电视台纪实高清频道，用心记录世界。
At the turn of the 20th century, called radium, it was the biggest news in science. Radium and its mysterious properties caught the public imagination, helping to sell a huge range of consumer products.
The name radium had a real cachet. It indicated something of value, something of high quality. And so manufacturers love to use that name with their products.
While 1 ton of radium could do the work of 1.5 million tons of coal. The problem facing the scientists was that all this seemed to completely go against the known laws of physics.
I've seen towns explode into cities. I've seen towns with their hearts ripped out. Every town has its own tales of triumph and catastrophe. All of them face challenges. As a geographer, I believe that towns are the communities of the future. Towns will be the places we want to live. By 2030, a staggering 92% of us will be living the urban life. Congested cities sprawl across our map, but cities don't have all the answers. I believe we need to fall back in love with the places that first quickened our pulses. Towns. Smaller than a city, more intimate, much greener, more surprising. Towns are where we learned to be urban. They are the building blocks of our civilization. Coastal towns, market towns, river towns, industrial towns. Collectively, they bind our land together. This is the story of towns, but it's also our story, where we came from, how we live, and where we might be going. This is Perth, right at the heart of Scotland. With a population of 45,000, it's a comfortable, largely well-heeled sort of place, aloof from the industry and politics of Glasgow and Edinburgh, surrounded by majestic countryside. It's also a town that thinks it should be a city. I'm going to find out why.
At the dawn of the 19th century, in a cellar in Mayfair, the most famous scientist of the time, Humphrey Davy, built an extraordinary piece of electrical equipment. 4 meters wide, twice as long, and containing stinking stacks of acid and metal. It had been created to pump out more electricity than had ever been possible before. It was, in fact, the biggest battery the world had ever seen. And with it, Davy was about to propel us into a new age. That moment would take place at a lecture at the Royal Institution in front of hundreds of London's great and good. Filled with anticipation, they packed the seats, hoping to witness a new and exciting electrical wonder. But what they would see that night would be something truly unique, something they'd remember for the rest of their lives. Using just 2 simple carbon rods, Humphrey Davy was about to unleash the true potential of electricity. Electricity is one of nature's most awesome phenomena, and the most powerful manifestation of it we ever see is lightning. This is the story of how we first dreamed of controlling this primal force of nature, and how we would ultimately become its master. It's a 300-year tale of dazzling leaps of imagination and extraordinary experiments. Tens of thousands of volts passed across his body and through the end of a lamp that he was holding. It's a story of maverick geniuses who used electricity to light our cities, to communicate across the seas and through the air, to create modern industry, and to give us the digital revolution. But in this film, we'll tell the story of the very first scientists who started to unlock the mysteries of electricity. There's something alive in there. They studied its curious link to life, built strange and powerful instruments to create it, and even tamed lightning itself. It was these men who truly laid the foundations of the modern world. And it all started with a spark.
北京电视台纪实高清频道，用心记录世界。
At the turn of the 20th century, the discovery of a brand new element was splashed across front pages all over the world. Called radium, it was the biggest news in science. One reason for all the excitement was the way radium behaved. It spontaneously glowed in the dark and created ghostly patterns on photographic plates. It seemed to be creating energy out of nowhere. Radium and its mysterious properties caught the public imagination, helping to sell a huge range of consumer products. Which is surprising, since radium is radioactive.
The most famous of these products, the Revigator. Over 500,000 of these sold in the United States in the 1920s. Water jar lined with radioactive ore. The consumer would fill it up with water, and the following day the water would be charged with radioactivity. These are certainly radioactive.
So great was the hype surrounding radium that small amounts of it were even put into toothpaste, healing pads, tiny toys. Just the name radium was a strong selling point.
The name radium had a real cachet. It indicated something of value, something of high quality. And so manufacturers love to use that name with their products. With the radium beer and radium condoms and radium cigarettes, you're ready for a fun night on the town.
The scientists responsible for first isolating radium were Marie Curie and her husband Pierre. It didn't take them long to recognize its extraordinary potential. Just 1 gram contained enough energy to turn a ton of freezing water into steam, while 1 ton of radium could do the work of 1.5 million tons of coal. The problem facing the scientists was that all this seemed to completely go against the known laws of physics. The first law of thermodynamics stated that energy cannot be created or destroyed. But these radioactive substances seemed to be pouring out unlimited amounts of energy. So where was this energy coming from?
The Curie's favorite view was that radioactive materials such as radium had this unique ability to extract energy from their surroundings and then release it in the form of radiation.
As radioactive substances were studied more closely, something peculiar was noticed. They gradually transform or decay into something else. Radium eventually becomes lead. What scientists realized was that as these substances emit energy, they also lose mass.
The energy wasn't being extracted from the air. It wasn't being extracted from the ether. The energy was found in the mass.
The link between energy and mass was eventually explained by Albert Einstein's famous equation. Energy equals mass times the square of the speed of light.
E equals mc squared points out that the mass of the atom, the mass inside the nucleus, in fact, was the energy itself. And the decay simply transformed that mass into energy.
Scientists had successfully explained heat and movement in terms of energy. Now, energy, which hadn't even existed as a concept 50 years earlier, was being used to explain the nature of matter itself. In fact, there was nothing that couldn't now be explained in terms of energy. Not just steam engines and windmills, but living things, stars, even galaxies, all were governed by the laws of energy. In its quest to understand what power is, science had uncovered secrets which lay at the very heart of the universe. The theory encapsulated in E equals mc squared would eventually lead to nuclear energy and the atomic bomb. But the consequences of that belong to a different story. Instead, to complete the story of power, we need to go back to the turn of the 20th century. Back then, the scientific theory of energy might have been lighting up men's minds, but it wasn't lighting up anyone's homes. Not yet, at any rate. Most people's domestic lives were largely unaffected by developments in thermodynamics or electromagnetism. Outside, there were telegraphs and steam trains. But at home, there were gas lamps, candles, and open fires. What changed our personal relationship with power was the discovery that the link between electricity and magnetism worked both ways. Ørsted had shown that an electrical current could act just like a magnet. The British scientist Michael Faraday was the first to demonstrate the opposite with electromagnetic induction.
I've got a magnet. I've got a coil of copper wire going round and round and round, and what I'm going to do is make the magnet move through the middle of the coil. As I move the magnet up and down through the wire, the electric light flashes on and off. Faraday realised if you have the movement of the magnet through the coil, then you can use that to generate electricity, and then you can use the electricity to power machines.
This was a revolutionary discovery. In theory, if the magnet could be moved fast enough, it would produce an electric current that was continuous. What was needed was something to move the magnet. Something like this. Niagara Falls, one of the most powerful waterfalls in the world. The challenge lay in finding a way of converting this mass of energy into an altogether more useful form. Electromagnetic induction offered the promise of harnessing the power of the falls to produce electricity. But it would require a colossal feat of engineering to do it. The project began deep underground. Tunnels were dug into solid rock by hand to divert some of the water to an electrical generator. Those taking part sensed it was the dawn of a new age. When completed, this power station was described as a feat to rival the pyramids, the temples of the Greeks, and the great cathedrals of Europe, a monument to the scientific age. These giant turbines are the ultimate expression, both of what power is and what power does. Huge magnets, turned by the power of falling water, creating enough electricity to power 750,000 light bulbs. But for electricity to become a commodity, something that could be bought and sold, there was one final barrier to overcome: how to get it from Niagara to places where it could be sold. Existing power sources could comfortably transport electricity over short distances. But as it traveled further, the electricity's power would quickly diminish. After as little as 2 miles, virtually no current will be getting through at all. Here at Niagara, this problem was overcome. Its generators produced what's known as alternating current at high voltage and low power loss, which meant electricity could travel long distances. In November 1896, power from the falls was switched on. For the first time, electricity traveled from Niagara to Buffalo, more than 20 miles away. In that fleeting moment was born the electric age. The quest to discover what power can do has transformed our lives. It set us on a relentless search for new sources of energy. From deep within the Earth, or inside the smallest atom, to the sun itself, our hunger for more power knows few bounds. Small wonder that our planet, alone in the solar system, glows in the dark. But the quest to know what power is has had an equally profound effect. Using the language of mathematics, energy has been revealed as a fundamental component of the universe. But the theoretical understanding of energy is, in no small part, built on the earlier contributions of more practically minded men.
The whole of modern physics, in a way, rests on all those industrial innovations that were being made in the 19th century and which led to this new concept of energy.
The joint understanding of what power can do and what power actually is has become one of the driving forces of humanity and human exploration and underpins the modern world today.